exchange between tax administrations and law enforcement authorities, not a public information exchange. There are different views in Europe on this. I am of the view that there is no point trying to achieve global rules, get global rules, and then fail to implement them. This is a discussion I've had with colleagues at home and with members of the European Parliament. I don't think that we're going to get a better global agreement if we fail to live up to the rules we have. Germany currently has the presidency of the G20, and colleagues from other continents remind us of what we have signed up to. And the existence of an agreement depends on signatories keeping to the agreement, whether it's Japan, the United States, whoever, on the code of conduct. I said there's to be more reporting to ECOFIN. I don't want to go into this very deeply. I have no legal service opinion. The poor old Commission and Council have enough hassle from me as it is. I don't want to make the situation worse. But the Code of Conduct Group is a group set up by the Member States. It's intergovernmental. As the Chairman said in his introductory remarks, there is unanimity in tax matters, and you can criticize that. I'm sure we could agree on many things if I were to give you my personal opinion, but this is the law, and we can only act within the existing law. So there's nothing really more I can say about European versus national. To Mr. Ježek and the PEPs. The reason why we drew this distinction was strong resistance in the national parliament. A German government is set up and booted out by the parliament. And that's why the government has a great deal of respect for the parliament. I don't think that German members of parliament, regional parliament, federal parliament, or the European Parliament are a particular risk factor. The point is here that the small financial institutes have become extremely cautious. And what can happen is that if somebody is a relative of a member of parliament, the local bank can say, we're not going to open an account for you because it's too risky. The bank doesn't stand to make any profit from a single account, and it leads them to be cautious. And when this happens to a number of members of parliament, that leads them to decide in a certain way. And the federal Parliament is distinctly enthusiastic about changing the rules. And I think we should try to achieve more solidarity and more consideration between the different categories of members of Parliament.
Thank you very much for those clear answers. I shall move on. We have 3 ministers who haven't answered questions yet. May I turn to the Irish Minister next?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Cofford and Mr. Ježek for their questions. If I begin with the issue first of country-by-country reporting, one of the questions put to me, Ireland has had this mechanism in place now since 2015. We put this measure in place because we believe that it is an appropriate response back from a national authority to dealing with an issue that is of concern to our own taxpayers. It has been a measure that has been in place. It is effective, and we are supportive of the development of this directive and approach across the European Union. I met Commissioner Moscovici on this, and I've indicated the Irish support to this measure. Of course, there are always going to be particular issues in a directive of this kind that we may need to focus on, we may need some adjustment on, but the very broad thrust of what the European Commission are looking to do and which they're engaging with you on, we support, and we've had, as I said, a similar measure in place now since 2015 in Ireland. In relation to the Code of Conduct business group, I mean, this is an intergovernmental group that Ireland has found very helpful. We have found it very helpful for increasing further awareness for our country in relation to the OECD BEPS commitments that we have. We are playing a supportive role and a positive role in that group in relation to the development of a common European blacklist, which we believe is, again, an appropriate global response back to issues that are of concern to this committee and to the European and indeed to Irish taxpayers. In relation to Mr. Jacek and the question that you put to me in relation to the public access to trust registers, the Irish tax environment requires our citizens to disclose a very significant and indeed full amount of information in relation to them. And this information is supplied so that we can ensure that Irish tax law is impartially and effectively implemented. And a consequence of this is that there are difficulties for us as a state then, and indeed significant difficulties, when information that we obtain from our citizens on a private capacity to ensure they are compliant and meet their tax obligations, when some look to make that same information public. And that does cause a significant issue for Ireland. In relation to the issue that you have raised there about trusts and the beneficial ownership register, the particular matter that we have there is that we have within Ireland a very broad range of trusts which reflect the fact that we have a common law legal tradition. And many of these trusts, the vast majority of these trusts indeed, are used for entirely legitimate business activity by our citizens, and indeed could also have social and legal roles that they play. And if we ask our citizens to provide information to ensure those trusts are set up in a way that are tax compliant with our law, then it does create an issue for us if the same information is then required to be made public as well. But all that being said, there are many areas within that proposal that we are supportive of, and we will be engaging constructively on that matter through the trilogue process.
Okay, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dijsselbloem, for the questions addressed to you, sir.
Thank you. The first topic raised by Mr. Kofod was on the reform of the Code of Conduct Group. I think the key issue is here, what are the issues that we leave in the hands of the Code of Conduct Group and what should be in the hands of politicians? And I think that's the key reform that we need. So I think the Code of Conduct Group is very useful. It helps us to exchange practices, to jointly between the tax authorities develop better practices. But if we are in fact developing new legislation, I think it needs to be in full transparency. It needs to be a political debate and a political discussion. So that's why, as Dr. Schäuble said, there should be more often a report to the ECOFIN to see the ongoing work and to take political decisions where needed. getting rid of unanimity is, of course, a much bigger issue. You just can't say only for the Code of Conduct Group we'll get rid of unanimity. It is a huge political question whether tax policy should be in the hands of national governments or not. I would still argue it should be. That doesn't stop us from working together much closer towards harmonization on different areas of taxation. The second topic you raised was about the worldwide disclosure, country-by-country reporting. Dutch government is in favor of that, so I think I can be short there. Then the more specific question to me by Mr. Jesek was how will we deal with the CVBV? It's going to be, we get rid of it. It will be dead in 2020. That's the short answer. It could be dead even sooner if the Americans do a tax reform, a reform of their corporate tax from their side, because these loopholes always are created by the mismatch, deliberate or not, the mismatch between two tax systems. So if the Americans move even faster, it'll be gone and dead before 2020, but at the latest, from our end, we will stop it completely. Would I have done it before? Personally, yes. In the Dutch political situation, this is the best I could do.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister.
Thank you, Minister. The Italian minister was simply praised by the rapporteurs, but I'm not going to deny you the floor if you would like to take it.
Just to say thank you.
Okay, vielen Dank. Wir kommen.
Very good, thank you. That brings us now to the group speakers. I'll take three. Brian Hayes from Ireland, EPP. Peter Simon, Germany, S&D. Angel Chambatsky, ECR from Bulgaria. Brian first.
I want to welcome the four ministers to our PANA committee and thank them for their attendance. I've just two brief questions to each of the four ministers who are here. The first is on the question of the EU proposal on tax intermediaries. You're probably aware from our draft report from PANA that we think about a fifth of all of the PANA cases relate back to European intermediaries, European bankers, European tax advisors, European accountants who set up these schemes, who organise these schemes on a cross-country basis. And my question really to you is in terms of the latest EU proposal from the Commission, do you think that proposal goes far enough in terms of automatic exchange of information on aggressive tax planning schemes? Does it go far enough in identifying the very large-scale nature of those schemes? And could you maybe give an example in your own country of where you've moved towards a mandatory disclosure requirement on aggressive tax planning? And my last question is this. For ordinary people, they want to see that the OECD BEPS process actually delivers more corporate tax. That's the name of the game. That's what people are after. Can you give out any evidence to this committee from what you have seen thus far in terms of the guidelines, now in place 2 years, closing down loopholes in your own member states and the like? Has it actually delivered more corporate tax for citizens? I know in the case of my own country in Ireland, which the Minister may or may not want to comment on, in the past 4 years, corporate tax amounts have doubled. It's now 15% of the total tax take in Ireland. The OECD average, as I understand, about 10%. Is that the experience in the 3 other countries? Because that's what citizens want to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Nun Peter Simon.
And now Peter Simon. My question is to Minister Schäuble. Minister, you said that the Financial Intelligence Unit was going to be beefed up in human resources terms from the 1st of July and being moved from the police to the customs. 3 or 4 weeks ago we had a hearing of the Financial Intelligence Unit where the German side said exactly the opposite. They said that they had 165 people fighting money laundering in the customs, whereas at the moment there are 300 people working in the police doing that. Yet we heard that all sorts of suspected cases could not be treated because it wasn't possible to deal with them all. I did some investigation and I see that in the Finance Committee, the German police as witnesses were concerned that this risk turning into a contempt of court question. You've been praising a body which is described as failing to deal with money laundering and is even at a risk of encouraging terrorism or failing to prevent terrorism. How do you justify that, Mr. Schäuble? Thank you. The next speaker, Angel Jambatsky.
Honourable Ministers, I have two very brief questions. First for all, could you please tell us a bit more in detail about the ongoing processes and advances in your national investigations? This is the first question. And the second is for Minister Schäuble. Could you comment on the controversy regarding the paying for leaked information, which under German law is allowed but nonetheless sent a strange message, especially if you compare this to Denmark, which paid only a small amount according to news reports? Thank you.
Vielen Dank auch für die
Thank you very much for the short questions. That refers to the German police purchasing the Panama evidence. I'd like to begin the next round with Dr. Schäuble.
Fragen an ihn gingen.
Most of the questions were to you anyway.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As regards the Commission proposal, Mr. Hayes, as regards tackling aggressive tax planning and the obligation of disclosure, we think that the proposal is a suitable basis for the national measures that we are contemplating, and there's a significant amount of cross-border aggressive tax planning too, so that's another reason why we would support the Commission proposal. I would add to that that a demarcation line between what's aggressive tax planning and what legal tax planning might be is not particularly straightforward in any individual case. And one must recall that for the tax administration, you see, tax administration have to observe rule of law, just as others do across Europe, and certainly that applies in Germany. And so the German tax administration is not there to collect as much tax as possible. They're there to get the tax which has to be paid legitimately. So there's a slightly different approach to that, perhaps. And we're talking about complex rules that we have today, national, European, international rules. There's a lot of advice that's forthcoming, and you have to decide what legal advice constitutes. Of course, Mr. Simon, I know you're getting rather hot under the collar, but I think you possibly didn't pay sufficient attention to what I said. But I was saying, I've had a look at the texts that referred to here, and of course when you have press cuttings submitted to you, you read it carefully. As I said, we have the Financial Intelligence Unit, which actually was set up on the 1st of July this year. And we're now the 11th of July, are we not? It has new powers, and it has considerable boost in terms of human resources, personnel. And that decision in the federal government was taken after a long process of scrutiny and discussion between the tax administration and the Home Affairs Department, and you won't be entirely surprised, because if you have any experience of political life, you'll find that, we have a number of trade unions in Germany, have quite a host of them, and one of the representatives had to renounce one branch of a union for reasons of transparency, but I don't think you can really derive any conclusions as to what happened after the 1st of July. But we've got this shift of competence from the VKA, but the agreement was between the Finance Administration, the Home Affairs Administration, but some people in the BKA were individually not particularly happy with that, which is why you might have heard the echoes of that in the press. Mr. Jambaski, payment for information offered. Now, there was the last case where I was quite surprised, in fact, that the Federal Criminal and Police Office had the opportunity of purchasing the Panama Papers. Now, they were working together with the Hesse tax authorities. Hesse is responsible in this instance, and it was decided there that the purchase would go ahead. We were able to purchase a data set, and as far as I recollect, right at the beginning of 2010, we adopted practice which was agreed in the Financial Ministers' Conference of the 16 federal lender and the federal finance minister, that we would keep each other informed and that we would share the costs of any purchased data sets. And there were a number of them that were purchased. North Rhine-Westphalia was one instance. And we've had a very successful public prosecutor's office there for decades, in fact. The North Rhine-Westphalian administration have a great deal of data collection offered to them for criminal investigative purposes, and they took a decision that it would be paid for. The decision was controversial at the time, but it was a clear legal decision. It was never challenged by a court of law, and it was a difficult decision to make. And I can understand that you might be otherwise minded, but as I say, we were going back to 2010. There were differing views of the matter, and I decided that the purchase would go ahead because it was legally acceptable. But the 50% of the purchase price was supported by central government and the rest between the lender governments. And there was a lot of press cover of the coverage of the success of that, but people didn't give as much press prominence to the way that the costs were shared between those who made use of the data. So I think when we have the automatic exchange of information, we've got cooperation with Switzerland as of 2010. This whole thing has been much reduced in scope, therefore. But as I have to say, it's not the most elegant instrument to have to use. We're talking about Switzerland, another country where rule of law applies, after all. And, our cooperation is not without its difficulties, but we've always tried to take a balanced view of the situation, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Dijsselbloem.
Danke. So Mr. Hayes asked about the Commission proposals regarding tax intermediaries. My people are still studying the details, so forgive me for that. But in general terms, I think it's a very good and welcome proposal. It also helps us, because one of the topics that we in the Netherlands still have to address is the whole sector that is servicing trusts and companies We are putting, you may be aware that we had a parliamentary research committee looking into this sector and the practices. They've come up with some conclusions, and we had already prepared legislation to give our supervisors on the trust servicing sector, give our supervisors more powers to deal with things that are going wrong there. So this is all very welcome. It helps us, and in general terms, I'm very positive about it. Your second question is more difficult to answer, and I would be intrigued to ask Ireland, but I won't. How can you be so sure that your extra income from corporate tax comes from what we've done in the field of tax evasion? Because I find that hard to distinguish. I mean, the income that we have from corporate tax has gone up in the last couple of years with huge amounts. And I wish it all comes from fighting tax evasion and tax fraud, but it probably has to do with the fact that the economy is booming. And it's probably the same in Ireland. So somewhere deep down, I'm pretty confident that fighting tax evasion and tax fraud leads to more corporate tax income for the government, for the state. But I can't distinguish it from the huge growth in corporate tax income at the moment. So I can't be specific. Mr. Zambaski has asked about the progress in national investigations. I already said in my speech that we have identified, coming from the information of the Panama Papers so far, a couple of hundred of Dutch taxpayers, and we're now doing a, of course, in-depth investigation in these cases. It is a huge effort. It takes a lot of capacity. And all of these activities that we're talking about today take a lot of capacity. So I think we have to realize that and take the consequences of that. It is hard and it's time-consuming. And we, later on in the process, will be able to say more about the outcome. But at the moment, it's on these cases we're doing the research that is needed. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. Anyone else?
You have only 15 minutes. Okay.
I will be very, very brief then, just to deal with the issue of tax intermediaries. Ireland has had mandatory disclosure arrangements in place now since 2011. They apply to all taxpayers, not just to large global enterprises. It's a law that is implemented by our Revenue Commissioner. This is one of a suite of measures that we've implemented. In terms of its impact on corporation tax, I think the point that Mr. Hayes was making is that this is a contributory factor to what is happening. And we've seen growth in the Irish and global economy that has also led to a growth in corporation tax revenue. But in addition to the change I've referred to there, we've also made many other changes to our corporation tax regime so that we meet the obligations that we have through BEPS in the OECD in relation to the elimination of the double Irish arrangement, in relation to the elimination of stateless companies. And we've made those changes to deal with the issues that we know are of concern to taxpayers. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Danke. 20 Sekunden möchte.
Thank you. Peter Simon, 20 seconds. I actually only used 1.5 minutes of my 5-minute time. I have a specific question to Dr. Schäuble. Dr. Schäuble refers to something that I said. Question 1. Is it true that at the moment there are thousands of reported cases in Germany of money laundering that are not being treated? And the police is saying that a better equipped customs authority cannot help to deal with that situation. Is that true? Second, is it true that that there are 300 people working in the field, whereas in customs there are only 50 people in the field, and only 100 extra people are going to come on stream, which means that ultimately there will only be half of the already unsatisfactory number. Your chairman was very generous and you used the time well. Dr. Schäuble.
Well, to be honest, I find that this kind of inner German debate perhaps ought to be taking place in Germany in the German Parliament. But I will say to Mr. Simon, by way of further information, that when it comes to combating money laundering in the federal lender, the picture varies somewhat, but overall, the social affairs ministries are responsible, and it's the inspectorate, the industrial inspectorate, that is responsible for doing that. And combating money laundering perhaps might not be on the absolute top priority of their inspectorate's concerns when they go to visit companies, but that's a matter for discussion in Germany, I hold.
Thank you very much. Fabio De Masi for the GUE, Sven Giegold for the Greens, and for the EFDD, David Coburn. As brief as you can, because the clock is ticking.
Yes, Dr. Schäuble. You've said in response to Mr. Jeschek that there's a great deal of resistance in the German Parliament, the Bundestag, concerning bringing in enhanced due diligence requirements for politically exposed persons outside the EU. Now, I would come back on this again and say, can you say where this resistance lies? I understand that it might be from your own political group. Now, you know, when you have to have that sort of PEP, politically exposed person, checks, you know, I go to my savings bank, perhaps I'll take my son along with his piggy bank and see what happens and try and open an account for him. Now, you're talking about also the purchase of data sets. And it's rather difficult to have linkage of this with other assets, because it doesn't work so well in Germany. Okay, if you're looking to Italy and mafia, organised crime there, I'd like to know how you cope with people laundering their money in real estate in Germany and a register there. Then we've got Switzerland, and there are many dividends which are covered by Article 15 of the double taxation agreement with Switzerland, and a lot of wealthy Germans avail themselves of advantages under that arrangement. I'd like to know what your ministry tends to do about that. I'm now going to move into English.
We agreed on 5 minutes, I guess, but
no,
to the
5
British,
minutes.
to the Irish
for
Minister of
question and
Finance,
answers.
The double Irish and the Dutch sandwich has been phased out with a phase-out period till 2020, which is quite generous. However, several tax treaties keep the double Irish structure in place beyond 2020 in Ireland, including with jurisdictions such as Panama, Malta, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Will you commit to reviewing Ireland's network of double taxation treaties in order to remove the double Irish and the Dutch sandwich?
Okay, vielen Dank, Sven.
Thank you, Sven. Thank you, Chairman.
I've studied a lot of documents now about the proceedings in the Council on Tax and Money Laundering, and there's one thing which was consistent, and that is the support of the Italian government for European cooperation in fighting money laundering and tax evasion. So I can only also give that compliment to you. Italy and Germany together implemented successfully the 4th IMLD revision. When we look at the revision, though, I see one problem when it comes to to Germany, and I switch now to German. Herr Schäuble.
Mr. Schäuble, in my view, there has been a breach of European law in implementation. If companies are set up in Germany, then surely the beneficial owner has to be disclosed. When there is a series of businesses behind this, then there is no disclosure, and we would consider that a breach of the money laundering directive. And I would like you to give us your view on the country-by-country reporting. You rightly pointed out that there was a German initiative to promote country-by-country reporting. However, the G20 agreement doesn't rule out the possibility of making some of this information public, as we do with the banks in Europe. The problem is in the agreement of the Grand Coalition, and we in the European Parliament would like that data to be public so that the public can form an opinion. And unfortunately, it is German resistance in Council that is stopping Italy, the Netherlands, France and Spain getting their way. We call on you to help us to get that legislation. Please. I'm afraid you've spoken even longer than everybody else. On the 8th of June, Ireland and the Netherlands in the Code of Conduct group were against the certain new rules being used in the case of old cases. Why did Germany block the position? David Coburn.
Intervention, please.
Dankeschön, Herr President. I'll be quick. We are talking about tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is encouraged by higher taxes. In the UK, the simple solution to this is simply to reduce taxes. Those advocating a 15% corporation tax will be handed ammunition by the EU's attempt to punish the UK for Brexit. We heard from the UK Government Minister Hammond at the beginning of the Article 50 process that if there was a bad deal, the UK would have little choice but to lower corporation taxes to remain competitive. Just as corporation tax is seen as a threat, it can also be seen as an opportunity. I would like to ask the Irish Minister a playful question. What advantage does the Irish Finance Minister see in UK corporation tax coming down to 15%, or indeed lower? May I suggest the Irish Republic join us in Brexit, throw off the shackles of the Competition Commission, state aid in the light of the Apple ruling, and free yourselves from the ECB? A question to all the ministers, and very quickly, an EU press release on the fourth anti-money laundering directive last week discussed suppressing tax avoidance. In common law jurisdictions, tax avoidance is not illegal. Tax evasion is illegal. Tax avoidance is a duty of company directors to reduce taxes for the benefit of their shareholders. This in turn makes tax authorities more efficient and careful with hard-working taxpayers, companies and taxes. Are the ministers aware that the EU is now pushing for crushing of tax avoidance? Because that is distressing to the UK and should be distressing to all parts of the European Union that believe in capitalism and believe in free enterprise and trade.
Mit Blick auf die Uhr möchte
Looking at the clock, I will take the next two and then we'll have the answers. Mario Borghezzi for the ENF.
Okay. Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. And of course, I'd like to thank the ministers for being here. Yesterday, during the OECD meeting in Vienna, Mr. Gratteri, the magistrate from Calabria, was present. He's considered in our country the greatest expert in organized crime, and especially that dealing with the 'Ndrangheta, which today is the greatest organized crime groups. There were many questions for him by all the members, and I'd say that discussion monopolized everything, apart from the question that the colleague who was talking about the banks buying a property. Apart from that, the Italian minister never even touched upon the question of mafia infiltration, so money laundering for money that belongs to organised crime. And that is really bad, because this should be one of the central points of this thought, especially when we consider Germany, Mr. Schäuble. I think that here there's a lack of attention. There's investment in property, in the property market, but also big investments in companies that are shaky. Now, if I'm not mistaken, in Italy, there's no investigations, no monitoring. If you buy the shares that have been bonds, I'll conclude there's also the problem of tax evasion due to sponsorship, sports events, for instance, Formula One, all these gadgets, and a lot of friendships as well in the political sector. Maybe that's why. Just give me 3 more seconds, please. And finally, the efficacy of customs control. I'm not really connected with information of the customs police in Germany, but everyone knows that millions of containers arrive in the port of Hamburg from China, and they contain all sorts of stuff.
Microphone for the chairman, please. It's very rare that we see something of this kind. There's no catch the eye. Romana Tomc is the last speaker for the EPP.
Thank you for the floor, dear President. Respected guests, just a short question for all of you. I'm very well aware that each country has its own legislation and its own institutions who are supposed to be independent and who are designed to prevent tax fraud and money laundering. But not all of them, unfortunately, are very successful. There are several and different reasons for that. But I'm asking you, each of you personally, as a finance minister of your country, what would you personally do if you heard of tax fraud or money laundering in one of your biggest banks in the country? This is a very simple and a very short question, and I would appreciate very much a very short and exact answer. What would you do as a finance minister of your country? Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Es tut mir leid, wir haben...
Thank you. It's 3:32. We'll have a round of answers, starting with the Italian finance minister.
Grazie. Una risposta all'onorevole
Thank you. I'll try to answer to Mr. Borghezio. He touched upon many themes that are, however, quite similar. There's one thing I need to say, though. Our experience in Italy over the last few years is obtaining great success in combating fraud tied with organised crimes, because it is now being coordinated for various types of crimes. For instance, if we look at mafia activities, there's criminal activities, there's tax fraud, and there's also corruption. Often they all go hand in hand, as they are all practiced by the same person or by the same criminal organisation. So what does this mean? Well, this means we have to make a lot of efforts to coordinate between jurisdictions using different instruments for repressing crimes, so that from the criminal accusation it can lead to tax fraud, and that can lead you to identify other types of crimes. Globalization, to use a term that joins all these points together, allows for all these links between different types of criminal activities. The institutions must respond in turn, identifying all these links so that they can combat it more efficiently. All the fields you mentioned, of course I haven't got time to go in details in each individual ones, you do find phenomena of this type.
Coburn hat ein Statement abgegeben.
David Coburn read out his statement and left, so there's no need for anybody to answer. Now the double Irish Dutch sandwich. The Irish minister, please.
Bitte. Ja, und dann Ihnen. Irische und dann Sie.
Well,
Irish then Dutch.
Coburn may be gone, but he did address a particular question to me, which, if the chairman will permit, I will answer at the end. In relation to the other two questions that were put to me, if I, as Irish Minister for Finance, became aware of any illegal activity in any bank that's located in Ireland, of course it would have to be reported to the relevant policing authority, which is An Garda Síochána, or our relevant tax authority, who is the Revenue Commissioner. And were such information to be available to either authority, it would be a matter of the utmost seriousness and would be pursued with the full rigour of Irish law. In relation to the question that was put to me about the future of the double Irish, the phasing out of this up to 2020 is a very solid and highly credible commitment to Ireland to dealing with this issue. In relation to other jurisdictions, we have 73 double tax treaties with other jurisdictions, and through those treaties and through our membership of the OECD, we're committed to eliminating any mismatches in relation to dealing with taxation between our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions. And then, Chairman, if you'll permit me, given that Mr Coburn did urge me to throw off my shackles, the United Kingdom may be leaving and is leaving, but Ireland is not. The European Union and our membership of it has been the vehicle through which my country has underwent a remarkable transformation over the last 40 years. It is a source of great sadness to me that the United Kingdom is leaving Brexit, is leaving the European Union. What they may do in relation to many different policy areas will be a cause of focus from all members of the European Union, but we will address all those matters as members of the family of the European Union and as proud members of the European Union.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister. Ich darf.
Thank you very much, Minister. I now turn to the Dutch Finance Minister.
Herzlichen Dank. So on the Irish-Dutch sandwich, however much I love Ireland and the Irish, I don't want to be part of the sandwich. So that's the answer to that. And the other question was very puzzling to me. What would I do if I found out about fraud in a bank? Well, of course, I would alert my authorities to look into it. The Dutch state still owns two of the largest banks, so if it would be one of those two, I would get personally involved as I'm shareholder. And in the third place, it could be relevant to inform Parliament. But you've puzzled me because there must be a reason why you asked the question. So I'll stop there.
Okay, gut, vielen Dank. Dann hat
Good, thank you.
Ja, aber jetzt keine längere
Intervention
mehr. Please.
The question for the answer. Why did Ireland and the Netherlands not support to bother about the old cases concerning economic zones in the Code of Conduct group of the 8th of June? That was my question.
I'm unable to answer that, so I will get back to you in a written form. The Code of Conduct Group does a lot of good work, and I'm sure they've done something wise here, but I'll look into it.
Yeah, and similarly, I'll come back to the member in relation to the matter in a written answer to the committee.
Thank you.
Gut, vielen Dank für das.
Good, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to answer in writing. Now, Minister Schäuble.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I've used up a great deal of your precious speaking time already. I shall keep my answers short. To Ms. Dumps, I will answer as Mr. Dijsselbloem has done. It's really up to the relevant authorities to deal with matters, and I'm afraid I'm not responsible for the criminal enforcement side of things. Now, Mr. Borghezio, you mentioned the Port of Hamburg and taxes and duties. Obviously, our customs people there have a huge volume of work, and they are fairly successful because of their targeted approach to fraud detection at customs level. That's why they're so successful. And Mr. Giegold, going in reverse order. When it comes to the implementation of the fourth anti-money laundering directive, it's a matter I need to get back to you on in writing. Now, as to the G20, you're right, it's not prevented from doing that. But colleagues, at all meetings, even last Friday evening in Hamburg, when we met as finance ministers in the G20, we were short of time for external reasons, but our meeting in the evening was long enough for our Japanese colleague to point out that we took that agreement for the criminal prosecution authorities and customs authorities as well. And of course, we will be looking at future progress, and we are continuing to work on making further progress internationally. But it's going to be much more difficult if we don't honour our existing international commitments. Now, a number of my colleagues view some of these matters as controversial. We have debates on that in the Bundestag. Now, Mr. De Masi, we're not talking about one member of Parliament. No, but I haven't suggested that every bank may operate in the way that your bank fortunately does not. But we have the cases that have been cited, but if we hear where does the objection come from, it comes from the Parliament. And as regards a real estate property register, we are monitoring developments in the real estate sector and its implications for finances. But the responsibility, as far as I know, lies with the Justice Ministry, not the Finance Ministry. So we have to respect the powers conferred on each sector of the administration, and we assume that people are monitoring property development very, very carefully.
Thank you very much indeed. There will be further answers in writing. I'm going to close the meeting now because we had a time limit. I'd like to thank the four ministers. A number of answers are going to come in writing, and I'm particularly grateful for that. Thank you all again, and the meeting is closed.